In a surprise pre-dawn operation, Ukrainian forces launched an ambitious cross-border offensive into the Belgorod and Kursk regions, marking a dramatic escalation in the two-year-long conflict that had previously remained largely confined to the Donbass and southern fronts. The world awoke in shock on a frigid March morning. Reports from independent observers, military analysts, and shell-shocked civilians all told the same story. Armored columns of Ukrainian T-84 tanks, backed by NATO-supplied artillery, had breached the border at multiple points under the cover of electronic warfare and drone swarms. The objective, according to sources inside Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, was to deliver a punishing blow deep into Russian logistics chains and force a re-evaluation of Russia's territorial ambitions. Within hours, Ukrainian troops had seized control of several strategic towns inside Russia, including Grayvorn, a key junction in Belgorod Oblast. Videos circulated online of Ukrainian infantry hoisting the blue and yellow flag over administrative buildings, their voices triumphant. Drones buzzed overhead, feeding real-time data back to command posts as elite units pushed rapidly toward the outskirts of Belgorod city itself. Ukraine's president issued a nationally broadcast address that morning, declaring, "For every home destroyed, for every child buried beneath rubble in Mariupol and Kharkiv, today we strike not out of vengeance, but necessity. Russia will now taste what it has served for years." International reactions were swift and polarized. Western capitals convened emergency security meetings. Poland and the Baltic states expressed open support, hailing Ukraine's bold move as a just retaliation. Meanwhile, Germany and France urged immediate de-escalation, fearing the potential for nuclear brinkmanship. The United States issued a carefully worded statement: "We stand with Ukraine's right to self-defense, but we urge all parties to avoid expanding the scope of this conflict." Inside Russia, the reaction was chaotic. While pro-government media initially dismissed the invasion as a provocation, it quickly became impossible to deny the facts. Footage of burning depots and fleeing civilians surfaced. Russian telegram channels erupted in fury, demanding accountability. Mobilization centers, dormant for months, reopened overnight. In Belgorod, panic gripped the population. Were emptied, bomb shelters filled, and local authorities broadcast evacuation notices. Russian reserve units scrambled to organize a counter-defense. The famed First Guards Tank Army, still recovering from losses earlier in the war, was ordered to halt its rotation and redeploy south. Ukrainian advances were swift. Their battle-hardened brigades, schooled by 2 years of attritional warfare and equipped with modern Western gear, proved lethal against hastily assembled Russian territorial defenses. Satellite imagery confirmed widespread damage to Russian fuel convoys and ammo dumps along the Oskol River basin. For the first time since the war began, the battle had come home to Russia. Ukrainian social media accounts flooded the internet with footage of captured equipment, intercepted radio transmissions, and cheering civilians waving Ukrainian flags. Some fringe separatist groups within Russia even issued statements supporting the Ukrainian incursion, claiming it as an opportunity to break free from Moscow's rule. Back in Kyiv, the mood was cautiously euphoric, but military planners knew that holding territory within Russia would be a different kind of war, one for which Ukraine might not yet be prepared. By early April, Ukrainian forces had entrenched themselves in several occupied sectors of western Russia, but the initial momentum had begun to falter. Russia, though caught off guard, was not beaten. In fact, the slow hum of its military-industrial complex was beginning to roar again. The first signs of Russian counteraction were subtle but unmistakable. A surge in reconnaissance drone activity, intermittent jamming of Ukrainian communications. Then came precision strikes on Ukrainian supply lines, especially rail corridors leading from Sumy and Kharkiv. Russia had learned from past mistakes. Instead of broad, lumbering armored assaults, they opted for localized artillery superiority and deep penetration Spetsnaz raids. In Belgorod, Ukrainian troops began experiencing increasing pressure. Morale remained high among frontline units, but logistical difficulties mounted. Fuel convoys were targeted by loitering munitions. Sophisticated Russian EU systems began disrupting Starlink terminals. And from the north, a fresh force appeared, the newly formed 14th Combined Arms Army, composed of rearmed and retrained conscripts, now battle-tested through months of preparation. The tone in Kyiv shifted. What was once a bold strike had evolved into a defensive slog. Holding territory inside an enemy's homeland, especially one with a much larger population and industrial base, proved nightmarishly complex. Guerrilla attacks from pro-Moscow paramilitaries inside the occupied zones increased. Ukrainian rear echelon units found themselves under constant ambush. Civilian cooperation waned. What began as a lightning strike turned into an exercise in attrition and exhaustion. The Kremlin, previously caught in a swirl of internal blame, began to consolidate around a singular narrative. Russia stands united against foreign invaders. Even opposition figures like Naval aligned voices. though critical of Putin, balked at the idea of Russian territory falling to Ukraine. Nationalism surged. By mid-April, Russian missile brigades redeployed from Kaliningrad began targeting key Ukrainian logistics hubs. A devastating Iskander strike on a bridge near Sumy cut off a major supply artery. Simultaneously, Russia activated reserve formations from Central Asia and the Caucasus, offering incentives to foreign volunteers. Thousands answered. Then came the first true counteroffensive. Using a blend of drone swarms, rocket artillery, and massed infantry, Russia launched Operation Zashita Defense, aimed at retaking lost territory and pushing Ukrainian forces back across the border. Belgorod, under Ukrainian control for nearly 3 weeks, became a cauldron of fire. Fierce street-to-street fighting ensued. Ukrainian soldiers held firm, repelling waves of attacks, but the weight of Russian manpower and firepower began to tell. Ukrainian commanders debated withdrawal, but President Zelensky resisted. "We will not yield ground. We came to end the war, not to retreat from it." Kyiv's refusal to withdraw meant more losses. Russian air dominance in the region, reasserted through a mix of Su-34s and hypersonic missiles, led to a 300% increase in Ukrainian casualties. Still, the orders stood no retreat, no surrender. But even valor has limits. By the end of the month, Ukrainian positions in Belgorod had become untenable. The retreat began. The Ukrainian retreat from Belgorod was neither chaotic nor disorderly, was methodical, bitter, and soaked in the blood of both victors and the vanquished. Yet, it marked the beginning of a larger reversal that Kyiv could not stop. Russia, once on the defensive, now held the initiative. By early May, Ukrainian units that had stormed across the border just weeks before were falling back into their own territory. Russian forces, reinvigorated by a flood of mobilized manpower and foreign auxiliary units, pursued relentlessly. The air around Kharkiv was thick with the stench of scorched earth as Ukrainian artillery crews desperately fired rearguard salvos to slow the advancing Russians. What had been hailed in Kyiv as the beginning of a final phase offensive was now being whispered about in corridors of government as a miscalculation of catastrophic proportions. NATO, while still politically aligned with Ukraine, had grown increasingly anxious. Intelligence briefings from Washington and Berlin were blunt. Russia's internal cohesion is stronger than anticipated, and their industrial capacity is surging. Indeed, by May, Russian arms factories had reached near World War II production levels. Artillery shells, tanks, drones, and munitions poured out of Siberian plants, operating on 20-hour cycles. China, while publicly neutral, quietly increased the flow of Dulu's components through Belarus and Central Asia. Iran stepped up deliveries of drone engines and loitering munitions. North Korea sent thousands of containers of ammunition. Ukraine, in contrast, faced growing shortages. Western aid shipments slowed due to political gridlock in the US and shifting priorities in Europe. Troops at the front reported firing only 1 round for every 10 used by Russian artillery. Their armored reserves, many damaged or abandoned during the incursion, could not be replaced fast enough. The famed 47th Mechanized Brigade was reduced to half its strength. Russian President Vladimir Putin, emboldened by public unity and military momentum, gave a nationally televised address declaring, "For every meter of Russian soil defiled, we will reclaim 10 of our choosing." Russian war doctrine shifted. It was no longer just about defending Donbass. It was about strategic punishment. By June, Russian armored divisions had crossed the Ukrainian border in a broad pincer formation targeting Sumy and Kharkiv. The goal was clear: create a new buffer zone, cripple Ukraine's capacity to launch future offensives, and punish Kyiv for its audacity. Hypersonic missiles screamed into Ukrainian command centers and radar stations, while cruise missiles pounded Western arms depots in Vinnytsia and Rivne.